Hello, hello, and welcome to the April edition of the Plant of the Month on the Alachua County Extension Cord podcast. As always, I am your host, DJ Dr. Carrots, also known as Dr. Kevin Corris, and I am joined by our environmental horticulture agent, Dr. Cynthia Nazario-Leary, and our family and consumer sciences agent, Martha Maddox. And we are going to talk to you today about how to grow, how to shop for, and how to prepare the wonderful plant Tomatillo. Or if you're born in America, especially in the South, the Tomatillo. All right, but it is pronounced Tomatillo, and it's a kind of a tomato-like plant. Cynthia, what the heck is a Tomatillo?
So a tomatillo is in the same family as the tomato, which is the Solanaceae, as well as there's other solanaceous plants. So when you're growing tomatillos, basically I think, let's talk about the similarities and differences, because I think that's probably the best place to start. So similarities are you can have, just like similar to the tomato, you can have your bush types and you can have your trailing types. So there are different varieties and cultivars of tomatillos. So you want to check if you're getting seed from somewhere, just find out what type of growth habit it's going to have, because if it's trailing, of course, you're going to need to trellis it. If it's more of a bush type, you might be able to grow it in a container, on your patio, your lanai. Some other similarities is that it's still going to probably get to a decent size, that you want to give it that spacing. In our earlier podcast, we talked about giving tomatoes space to grow, and also make sure you have good airflow to avoid pests and diseases. You want to do the same thing with the tomatillo plants. They can get as big, even though the fruit might be a little bit smaller, the plant itself can still get big. And the same with the tomatoes. Unfortunately, because they're in the same family, they're also susceptible to all the same diseases and pests that tomatoes have. So again, you're going to want to continue to monitor them for pests and diseases. You want to make sure that they're adequately watered, because just like the tomato, they need to develop that same fruit set. And so you want to make sure that they have adequate water, but not too much. You don't want them sitting in water either. So well drained. Again, they also are going to need that 6 hours of direct sunlight to develop a good amount of fruit set. And then again, also with tomatoes too, as well as other solanaceous, they can be susceptible to frost damage. So if you're growing them in the around where we have potential for frost damage, you're going to want to cover them if you're growing them during that time. So that's some of the similarities between the two. The differences come down to really how the fruit develops. So tomato, you usually can get away with a tomato plant, right? And you'll usually get some sort of fruit set. With the tomatillos, they tend to like to be cross-pollinated, so they kind of want some other tomatillos to be around with them. So if you want really good fruit set, then you might want to grow them with some other tomatillos so that you get good cross-pollination. Also, the way the tomatillo develops, it's going to have what's called a husk on it. And basically, they're modified leaves that are going to kind of grow over the fruit. Okay. And they're going to be green, and as the fruit develops, they're going to become less, they're going to kind of dry out and become more like what we think of as a husk, right? Sure. So a little bit drier. And you can kind of peek in. People sometimes afraid to peek in. They look like little lanterns when they start out. And as the fruit develops inside, it's going to fill up that space. And some people are sometimes afraid to kind of peek in there, but you can peek in there to see how it's developing. With tomatillos, you tend to want to harvest them when they're green. They want to be full, but once they start to turn yellow, the flavor is going to change a little bit. And that's usually when they're yellow, that's when they're fully mature and ripe.
Okay.
So just before they're getting to that yellow stage is when you want to harvest them. Now there's there's also what's called husk tomatoes, which sometimes are confused with tomatillos. And they're a little bit different. They're usually going to be a smaller plant with even smaller fruit set. And those fruits, they're also going to have the husk, hence the name. But they can come in like yellow to orange to scarlet. And anyway, they're going to have a different taste than the tomatillos. But sometimes those two get confused. They're similar species, similar genus, different species.
Gotcha.
So again, with the tomatillos, the main thing, think of them like tomatoes in terms of their growth and care. But when you harvest them, it's going to be a little bit different.
Great. So, all right. Some of the differences that you can observe when growing them. So not too different from tomato, it sounds like, giving them the same care, same fertilizer regimen, things like that, being weary of when they start to fruit, make sure that soil is wet but not overly saturated. So, all right, great. So similar to growing them as tomatoes, but that's kind of where the similarities stop, right? Because we don't necessarily want to eat them like we eat our tomatoes or prepare them like we prepare our tomatoes. Is that correct, Martha?
That's correct, Kevin. And when we're looking to purchase, that's where it gets even different, because when you're shopping and selecting your tomatillos, you want a bright green color and you want them very firm. And you also want the papery husk to be tan, and you want it right to the point it's fixing to burst.
Okay.
And that is because, like Cynthia said, that stage is the most flavorful. You get the best flavor out of it. When they start turning yellow, you don't get the flavor, and also they don't last as long. When they're at this, you also want a smaller, like the size of a cherry tomato. You want it unblemished, and these will give you the sweetest flavor. Now, if you say, well, I can't see for this husk, well, don't peel it all the way back, but just peel it a little bit back and see what color it is. You want to make sure that husk is light brown, it is fresh looking, and not shriveled and dried. That is very key, because if it's starting to dry out and shrivel, then they're old.
Past ripe.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. So they've got that husk on there. So once we buy them and get them home and store them, do we store them in that husk? Do we peel it off and wash them? How's that work?
That's where you're going to say, this is the biggest mess I've ever seen.
Okay.
I don't know about you, but I didn't see these till I was quite older in Arkansas. I don't know about Nebraska, but
they hardly exist up there.
Yeah, they hardly exist back home too. But anyway, you want to remove that husk because it's unedible. Yeah, you can store it in that, but you want, when you go to fix it, you want to remove that husk. Well, once you remove that husk, it's going to be sticky. And you're like, what have I got into now? So you want to rinse it very well, and you want to, using your hand and all to try to get that stickiness off. And then you've got to, you do not need to be peeled or seeded, and do not peel the green off of it. If you're a person that may have diverticulitis and you can't have the seeds or something like that, yeah, that's okay to cut it then and take the seeds out and cook your product the way you're going to cook it. But you always want to, you can even pull that whole plant up, and take and store the whole plant, like your tomatillos, on the vine or on the plant, and store them, and then just take them off individually when you're wanting to use them. But where do you store them? In a cool, dark, dry area, and then remove your fruit as needed. And you want to wrap them in loose paper if you're storing them individually.
Okay, just keep them dry.
Right, and especially in the refrigerator.
Okay. Well, so speaking of the refrigerator, I know that last month when we talked about tomatoes, it's not necessarily a good idea to keep them in there. When they get below 55, they stop producing that ripening enzyme. Is it a similar situation with tomatillos? Can you put them in the fridge?
Yeah, you can put them in the refrigerator for about 3 weeks. So that's, a little different than tomatoes. But you want to wrap them loosely in a single layer, or place them in a paper bag, not a plastic bag. I've had so many people call and say, can I put them in a plastic bag? No,
Sure.
Not plastic. It draws moisture. And you want to keep it in the coolest section of your refrigerator, and make sure that they're stored in an airtight container. So that paper, could be airtight there. And also, they can be frozen whole, or they can be sliced and frozen.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, all right, we've got them stored, or we're going to just take them home from the market and we're going to eat them that day. What do we need to do to prepare them?
Well, they can be, we've washed them, we've got them all ready, and now we're ready to do something with them.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be eaten raw. They can be eaten in salsa, guacamole, salads. Cooking enhances that flavor, and it also softens the skin. Now, keep in mind, the food is going to collapse after a few minutes. And when I say collapse, it's going to start getting kind of mushy, soft, a soupy consistency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. Also, you can dice them. You can cook them in sauces, moles, and stews. Grilling them is really cool. I've got a friend that grills them. And you just want to get your grill very hot. If that grill is not really hot, it's just like with peaches. You want that grill hot, so when you throw that fruit on there, it blackens immediately and before it gets too mushy. And that way you've got a smoky taste.
Okay.
And that's what the blackening does. If you're doing a dish that calls for smokiness, this is what you can do, smoke your tomatillos.
Okay. And you mentioned eating them raw, but if you just pop one in your mouth, it's a little bit sour, right?
Very
so if
sour.
you're going to eat it raw, maybe put it in a guacamole or a salsa or pico de gallo.
And also you're going to get so many seeds in there too. They have more seeds really than a tomato does because they're so fine, little. Wouldn't you say they're little?
They're smaller seeds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you just got your molars yanked out, you may not want to eat those seeds.
No.
Okay, so I know it's traditionally it's found in a lot of Mexican dishes, and
right.
Sometimes they'll eat it raw in their sauces, or they'll cook them. If we're gonna cook them, what can we do with them?
That's where the tomatillos differ from the tomatoes, because tomatoes you can cook different ways, but the flavor usually stays the same. For the most part, unless you grill them. And then you've got to be really careful with grilling tomatoes. Where the tomatillos, you be careful, but they're firmer. Mm. So if you're eating them raw, like you said, mostly is in the Mexican sauces. And these will add, this gives you the fresh, fruity-like flavor. So if you're looking for a fruity flavor, you want to do it in a raw dish. If you're wanting to look for a mellowy flavor, you want to do what's called blanching. And that is you bring a large pot of water to a rolling boil. You take that whole tomatillo with the husk removed and rinsed and it's clean. You drop it in that boiling water for about 5 minutes or until it's soft. Then you drain it and you crush the fruit, puree it, and follow your directions on your recipe. Now, this is one of my favorite, the fire roasted. This is where you're going to roast it over your broiler or with a propane torch, in the oven or on the grill. And that's where, like we talked a while ago, you've got to make sure that grill or that surface that you're fixing to roast it on is very, very hot. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing it in the oven, I get my trusty cast iron skillet, I put it in there, and then I want to blacken it or burn it like that to enrich the smoky flavor. And then with dry roasting, you want that nutty. So you've really got to put that on a cast iron pan or some kind of pan. And that gives it a nutty flavor. But instead of high heat, you want to use low heat. So keep in mind, if you want smoky, it's high. Okay. If you want dry roasted, nutty flavor, it is low heat. And you're going to do that for about 20 to 30 minutes, and you're going to want to turn that one. Whereas the fire roasted, you don't turn
leave it on to one side. Mm-hmm. Man, I imagine that would add some really good flavors by fire roasting or dry roasting, and then sticking that in a salsa. Ooh, wow.
The nutritive value. You want to know? You want to talk about that?
I do.
Okay. The nutritive value. They fit perfectly into the heart-healthy dietary routine. And
well, that's good, because I have hypertension. So
I do too, Kevin. But now, I think your girlfriend would be okay with this. You talk about her every once in a while, making sure that you stay on track.
She's keeping me on track.
On track. Well, hey, she cares about you. That's a good woman there. Naturally low in sodium. They're naturally low in sodium. But that doesn't mean, Kevin, you're like those people I watch that grabs before you taste it, that salt shaker. And start adding that extra salt. They're also rich in potassium. And so tomatillos are good to help regulate your blood pressure, they say. So that's a good thing to know, but you don't keep adding all that salt to them. They also provide a lot of vitamin A and C, and they act as an antioxidant with a lot of the free radicals. So basically, one tomatillo has 11 calories, 0.3 grams of fat, 0.3 milligrams of sodium, 2 grams of carbohydrate, 0.7 grams of fiber, 1.3 grams of sugar, and 0.3 protein. So they're an interesting, different fruit if you wanted to add flavor. And you can mix tomatillos and your tomatoes to get a really cool, especially in your dips, your sauces, with the smoked and the nutty.
Excellent, excellent. So for those out there who are adventurous in their culinary endeavors, consider adding tomatillo, this nutritious, delicious little vegetable, to your Taco Tuesday.
Fruit.
Well,
it's a fruit.
It is a fruit if you're asking a
it's
botanist.
a fruit. Well, I've got to say it's a fruit too, but I don't have my chef license. But I will say I hope you enjoy as much as I enjoy. My good friend Alex has a wonderful enchilada verde recipe that I've used the tomatillos that he's shared with me. So I hope you enjoy that. It's in the Plant of the Month article.
Awesome.
So
yeah, and so that's
check
one thing.
that out.
You're not going to get that red salsa-y color from these. It's going to either be a green or a bit of a yellow. So interesting. Is that what salsa verdes are made out of?
Yes.
If I can diverge from the topic.
And
okay.
here's the thing: since you brought up the yellow, your greens are going to be sweeter, more flavorful. Your yellows are going to be they're not going to really have a huge sweetness. They're just kind of be. You're going to have to add some herbs and spices to them. A lot of cumin probably to get the kick of the flavor, because they just don't have the flavor that the green ones do.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, I'm going to swing by the store and pick up some tomatillos. And it's a Wednesday as we're recording this, but guess what? It's going to be Taco Wednesday in my house tonight.
That sounds cool.
I want to thank you again for joining me, Cynthia and Martha. Again, I am Kevin, and I thank you for attending and listening to our April Plan of the Month Extension Cord podcast, and we will see you next month. Keep it tuned in right here.